Welcome back to Unplanned. Today we've actually gotten on an airplane and gone a little distance from Cambridge, Boston, Somerville. We are in the heart of our nation's capital with Marcel Acosta, who is the Executive Director of the National Capital Planning Commission. Marcel, welcome to Unplanned.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today.
Well, it's great. So I thought it would be a fun little excursion out of the Boston area to learn about what's happening in our nation's capital as it relates to urban planning. And you are pretty critical to that. You're right in the center of a lot of those conversations. Why don't we start by you just telling us a little bit about what you do, and then you can tell us a little bit about who you are. So, but first of all, what do you do? What do you do here?
Well, I'm the Executive Director, as you said, of the National Capital Planning Commission. We are the federal planning agency for Washington, D.C. and the National Capital Region. So our purview is over federal lands and federal development in our nation's capital. And so we deal with everything from reviewing projects at the Pentagon to fences at the White House, to new agency headquarters like the Department of Homeland Security at St. Elizabeth's, to new memorials and museums on the National Mall. So those are the sorts of projects that our commission reviews. We also are responsible for comprehensive planning for the federal establishment in Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C. is a really interesting city from an urban planning standpoint. It's both the nation's capital. It was created to be the capital of the United States through the Constitution as part of the founding of our country, but also as a local city. It is on a day-to-day basis. It is a place where the city of DC, over 700,000 people live. It's a region of 5 million people. We have, like any other city in the country or metropolitan area of the country, it's the same set of issues with respect to affordable housing and transportation and all the things that we care about. But being the capital, we have very unique things that we also need to pay attention to. Like I mentioned before, in terms of the federal operations, the security of our most important buildings, the landmarks that a lot of people care about in terms of what we see on the National Mall and some of the most beautiful historic buildings in the city. Those are the sorts of things that we work on as an agency, but also with our partners, including the local jurisdictions and the local planning offices, such as the DC Office of Planning.
That's, so that is a lunch buffet beyond all lunch buffets. That's really incredible. Before we dig into that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and how you got to this job, and let the good people know who you are.
Well, again, I'm an urban planner by training. I'm from California originally, the Bay Area, but I moved to Chicago and spent my first 16 years working in the great city of Chicago. So I had a lot of experience in local government planning, working on a variety of community issues. For a while, I was the director of downtown planning in Chicago. And then I did a Loeb Fellowship at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. That's where I met you at that time. And after that, I came to Washington, D.C. and served with this agency for 23 years. So planning in big cities is really a fascinating profession, and you get involved in a lot of different areas, like I mentioned before, from architecture and design to transportation and infrastructure to open space planning to historic preservation, and also how does new development fit into that framework. It's really an incredible field to be associated with.
Well, so we're going to go back now to the whole federal and local component of what you do. And it's really fascinating to hear all the different aspects of what you have to grapple with, from fence design at the White House, which is very specific, to much greater issues of citing a federal agency, for example, or the landmarks issue. Any one of those issues, and this is fascinating for anybody who has any interest in planning, any one of those issues is very, very complex. It can be very complex, and people tend to feel very strongly about them. Take us into that process a little bit more. So at any one of those levels, the very detailed or the much broader?
Well, I think one of the things as a planner that you come to realize very quickly is there's really no right answer. It's a matter of opinions and facts and kind of how you get people comfortable with an outcome. There could be multiple paths to an outcome. So everything from a fence design at the White House, a lot of that, for instance, around the White House, that because of security issues, that fence had to be heightened in order to prevent people from jumping over. There are a lot of historic preservation issues associated with it. A lot of people, I think, more fundamentally felt like, this is the people's house, and that we should still have the opportunity to see it, take photos of it, be part of this environment. So that's a design issue. In terms of just the pedestrian access and how people come into this space, you also have to be concerned about that too. So you listen a lot. There are different stakeholders involved in every types of decision that you might make. You spend a lot of time listening. You spend a lot of time trying to come to a win-win solution, but part of it is by understanding what each party or what each interest might want out of an outcome.
And let's first of all, let's take that example, because it is right. There's a few buildings more iconic probably on planet Earth than the White House. Who comes to you to say, we've got a project, it's about the fence around the White House, and then what do they need? They need review, they need approval, what do they need?
Typically a federal agency will come to our agency for a request for review. So like in any city that has a planning department, a private developer has to go through an entitlements process or zoning process. Here, federal agencies have to come to us for the similar type of review of their projects. So, and they would have a need, obviously. So, in the case of the White House fence, it was a matter of national security. But I think all the partners involved, and it would be everybody from the National Park Service to the General Services Administration, to the Secret Service, and all the security folks who have a responsibility for protecting that complex. I think they truly understand that, it's not just about a fence, but how you design it and how you make it feel like it's part of the environment. And also there were a lot of historic preservation considerations because of the proximity to the White House and kind of that whole relationship between the grounds, the White House, Pennsylvania Avenue, and the Lafayette Square, which is right across the street. So, they bring it to us. We go through, like every planning department, you go through design negotiations. We made sure that the distances between the pickets made sense to kind of echo the proportionality and the scale, even if it was higher, to have the same rhythm and balance that the previously existing fence had, that it met the security requirements of the security agencies that were involved and all of that. And there was a lot of deliberations that went on with respect to that fence. And we do that with not only the fence, but a lot of the federal agencies in the nation's capital have security requirements like that.
So and we won't get too far down the road of security because
Right.
there are just so many other topics to cover as well. But do you have, as it were, final sign off on this? You have to approve it
Yes.
before it can go forward.
Yeah, with many of the projects in the District of Columbia, those are for approval.
Right.
So those would have to go through a successive iterative step of redesign and design, and then it would come to us for final approval.
And that's because you have that provenance, if you will, over the federal city, basically.
Yes, I mean, it's a matter of federal law
Right.
that those types of projects be brought before the National Capital Planning Commission for review and approval.
Right. And there are lots of other parts of what you do, including, you mentioned St. Elizabeth's, you mentioned all these other projects that are ongoing, the Pentagon. It's really hard to imagine how challenging that must be, given the weight and scope of the federal government and what they bring to a project and what kind of staffing they can bring to any issue they want to kind of grapple with. What's it like on your side of that equation? What does that feel like?
Well, I mean, like in any other planning department or
Right.
planning agency, you do make an effort, and you have a responsibility for ensuring that everything is reviewed on time, that we meet the schedule, but also do it in a way that is professionally analyzed and all the issues are fleshed out and considered as part of it. And we have a really great team here at the commission who will do the staff review of it, and then it's brought to the commission for as a whole that where they will deliberate and have discussions about the project itself. So the commission, which is a 12-person body, will do that. Will make that final review. But it's a matter of just there's a lot of interesting work here. It's really a privilege to work on a lot of these projects. Now, I think that's a great incentive to do it right and do the best job that you can.
So let's jump back in history. You're celebrating, the agency is celebrating, commission celebrating its 100th anniversary, 100th birthday this year. Can you tell us a little bit of the history of the commission? So 100 years ago,
Yeah.
in 1924. What else can you tell us? What else can you fill in that picture of 100 years ago?
Sure. I think even stepping back beyond the 100 years
Sure.
might be really helpful to provide some context for the people listening to this. But Washington, D.C. is a planned city. It was a city that was primarily created to be the seat of the federal government. Pierre L'Enfant and Benjamin Banneker, and at that time kind of planned the core of what we know of Washington, D.C. today, to provide the space for federal buildings, but also for private development. So it was basically one of the first master plans at a big scale done in this country. So a lot.
And let's put a year on that. L'Enfant was working roughly.
Well, 1790s.
Okay.
Okay, so around that time
Right.
was when the federal city was established. So, and cities take time to develop and become whole. So it took about a century for it to fill in and become close to what you see today. There were successive plans by what we know as the Macmillan Commission, which established the National Mall, as you know it today, and kind of the formality of downtown DC that people recognize as being iconic and kind of very visually striking in terms of city form and being a city, as being a place. The commission itself was established in 1924. Our original mission was to implement portions of the Macmillan Plan and L'Enfant Plan. So their first set of tasks was to acquire many of the parks around the Washington, D.C. area. We have the luxury and advantage of having really a beautiful park system. A lot of that was due to the work of the commission at that time. But the commission was also given city planning responsibilities, not only at that time for the federal government, but also for the local cities. So like in Boston, let's say, we took up matters not only dealing with the siting of a federal headquarters building, but also everything from urban renewal to highway alignments and transit alignments to zoning. This commission had played a major role in all of that.
Starting as early as 1924.
Formalized as a planning agency in the 1950s. And in 1974, and for those that don't know, the city until 1974 was really managed and overseen by a federal board of commissioners. So there was no local government at that time. They were appointed because the district itself was a federal enclave, even though it was a big city at that time. So in 1974, the local government was established. The local government had the ability to plan for itself in terms of local issues, and they established a city council and a mayor. None of those things existed before then, and so there's now self-governance on the local side with respect to local affairs of the District of Columbia.
And why don't you just spend a minute, because many years ago I actually lived for a little while in Washington, D.C., and that whole interplay between the local and the federal is complicated. Sometimes there's some conflict or some friction involved in that. How does that play out from your vantage point?
I think, over time, I think the relationship has become very strong. I think we've all realized that cooperation is really the key to making this city and region a better place. The federal government is still a significant employer in this region. We still have a sizable amount of land that we manage or own, but to the extent that they are used as ways to better the district as a whole, we cooperate on a lot of initiatives together with respect to either transferring federal assets for private development or vice versa, or working on something like the Pennsylvania Avenue Initiative, which is really a place where that has a lot of importance from a federal government standpoint, but is a place where district residents and people of this region can celebrate, and really they have a great number of festivals on that street already. So there are opportunities to kind of look at ways to revitalize these places that are shared between the federal government and the host jurisdiction.
And how does it work on what in most other communities, or maybe all other communities in the United States, are very, very local issues like the affordability of housing, the ability to get around the city safely and comfortably, either on your bicycle or in a car, or whatever it is, or on your pedestrian. How do those interactions work, and what role do you all play in
It
that?
really depends on the issue. So, for instance, transportation is hugely important for the federal workforce. And to the extent that we work with not only with the district, but with the regional jurisdictions, the suburban jurisdictions, the transit agency on these issues, it's because it sustains and supports federal operations. So there's a lot of, there's a symbiotic relationship on those issues. With respect to affordable housing, we have some interest in that. I know, for instance, this administration, the Biden administration, it's a high priority for them. We try to support the district wherever we can with respect to either surplus land available for construction, or looking at zoning regulations, other things we could do to help deal with that. I think right now a lot of our shared interest is really with the health and viability of the post-pandemic environment. And this is not only in DC, but this is an issue that many cities are facing. What is the workforce going to look like? How are we going to sustain our downtowns?
Right.
How do we balance that with remote work and hybrid work? So those are a lot of the issues that we are having.
I'm going to just dig into one area, because I was here decades ago, so in the 90s really, and the whole area, I think it's around the convention center or the arena, and what was downtown, and it was really a sort of rundown area, looks to have been completely redeveloped. I'm just curious about that as one of the areas of the city that I presumably you played some role in that conversation.
Well, yeah, a lot of the revitalization of the city actually had many of the seeds planted really in the late 70s, early 80s. There was the Pennsylvania Avenue Redevelopment Corporation, for instance, was one of the first efforts to put residential development downtown. And that really kind of sparked this notion of, resident population in downtown DC. And to the extent that the district, through the efforts of, for instance, Mayor Anthony Williams, who was a very important figure in terms of the revitalization of not only downtown DC, but the district as a whole. I think that sort of work that they did in terms of redevelopment opportunities, kind of thinking about, do we need a new convention center, making new investments in the downtown public library, utilizing land for other purposes, whether it's an arena or the new city center development downtown, or even the air rights development near the Capitol. Those were all kind of done, a lot of it done by the district, some of it done in partnership with the federal government. There's a great, the revitalization of the Anacostia River and the area around that was really a product of federal local partnership. Where the location where the Nationals Park is, directly adjacent to it was an old surplus federal center where the land was given back for private redevelopment. And that whole transaction, plus the reinvigoration of the Navy Yards.
Well, the Navy Yard, I was thinking of the Navy Yard as well.
Where they brought back a lot of the offices, to that location, that kind of spun off the initial set of economic development opportunities in that area. The siting of the Department of Transportation headquarters in that area was also a catalyst for a lot of the private development that went there, and then the stadium.
Right.
So I think working in partnership with our local stakeholders kind of leads to a better environment for the federal workers who are there, but also an opportunity to kind of create a place, a community with all the open space and housing and public amenities and public infrastructure that's necessary to kind of create a new place in the city. So there are examples of that sort of working relationship between the district and the federal government where it's been really, really productive, but also really beneficial to both the federal establishment, but also to the district as a whole.
All right, one technical question and then a wrap-up question. The technical question is, what are the geographic boundaries of what you survey? Because obviously the federal lands are, I'm sure, defined, but the federal region is obviously much broader. So how does that all get figured out?
Sure. Well, our jurisdiction is actually the District of Columbia and the surrounding counties adjacent to the district. I'm both Maryland and Virginia, so that would include places like Arlington. If you thought about Arlington, the Pentagon is located there.
Right.
Fairfax County has a lot of our defense installations in that part of the region. Montgomery County is where the National Institutes of Health is located, and there are a lot of other facilities there. And in Prince George's County, we have places like Department of Agriculture Research Center that are out there. There are a lot of, outside of the monumental core and what we think about, think in terms of federal headquarters, there are a lot of federal installations and federal operations that have places and sites throughout this region. So we review those projects too and do planning for those locations.
This is not your wrap-up question, but WMATA, Metro, the train system, and I assume the bus system, how do you relate to that? I was just riding Metro earlier today, and I was remembering really how good it is. I mean, we all like to complain about public transit, but it's actually a very good system, I think. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, ironically, I used to serve on the Metro board
of
directors.
Yeah.
But to the extent that there was federal engagement and involvement in the creation of Metro, it was actually built by the Army Corps of Engineers.
Right. It looks that way. So
but I actually think, to the extent that there was a lot of pride in this system when it was built, it was one of the newer systems. That this agency had a lot to do with the planning of that and the alignment and kind of the thinking about where it should serve. But it was really, portions of it, or a lot of it was designed to carry federal workers into the core. And so for decades, it kind of served that as a very fundamental market for WMATA in terms of regional transit and who uses it. It was really designed to bring people from both within the district, people who live here, but also people who live in the suburbs to their offices in downtown DC or in other federal installations. So it's really important to us, and that to the extent that we can reduce parking at a lot of these facilities was kind of driven by the fact we had such a valuable transit system adjacent to many of these federal buildings. So for us, it's hugely important.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful system. And I hate to say it, but compared to the T, it's fabulous. I mean, the T is really suffering. It's sad. Yeah, I mean, they're starting to get new rolling stock and all that, but it's really still struggling a lot. And the backlog of work is just through the roof. But your wrap-up question is, for the good viewers who are watching this, what are two things that come to mind that viewers should keep their eye out for, exciting things happening in DC that you're working on that are probably maybe a year down the road, 5 years down the road, 25 years down the road? What are a couple of projects that come to mind?
Sure, I mentioned the Pennsylvania Avenue Initiative. So we have, we've been working on this for a while, but we have a partnership with the District of Columbia and other federal agencies to really rethink the street, that it no longer really serves much of a purpose in terms of being a very auto or car-centric street, that its value to the city in terms of public space may be a venue, a place where we could host more festivals and more public events and that people could enjoy as a public space. So we have a design contract that's out right now that consultants are responding to. And that's something to be on the lookout, because I think in terms of just one of the most important streets in our country, one of the most memorable streets and names in this country of important streets, Pennsylvania Avenue, is a place that has a lot of potential, but it needs to meet it. Yeah. And I think it could do a lot in terms of reinvigorating downtown DC. A second set of issues that we're dealing with is really kind of the notion of what stories are told in the nation's capital. We have a lot of our work is focused on new memorials and museums.
I'm just going to say, I am fascinated by public memorials.
Yeah.
And because of that storytelling, the historical, what history is the history that gets prioritized to be told and memorialized in copper or bronze or whatever, or stone. Fascinating.
You're absolutely right. So the question, I think this is a hugely important issue for a lot of Americans in terms of like being acknowledged, being recognized, having their stories told, on America's front yard, which is the National Mall, or being in Washington, D.C. So a project that we've undertaken was a project called Beyond Granite. And last summer, the summer of 2023, we did the first ever public art exhibition asking the questions, what are the untold stories on the National Mall? So we had 6 artists. We worked with the National Park Service and the Trust for the National Mall, and it was funded through the Mellon Foundation's Monuments Initiative. And it was really a way to have different stories told in this space, done in a way that would protect the important open spaces of the National Mall. And we wanted to see how that resonated with the public. So we had everything from a beautiful statue of Marian Anderson, who was the first singer at the Lincoln Memorial. She's an African American. And having her life celebrated at the Lincoln Memorial as a way for people to remember that remarkable event. We had a sculptural piece of a thumbprint by the Declaration of Signers Memorial at Constitution Gardens on the National Mall, juxtaposing kind of Native Americans who signed away their rights or signed away their lands or had treaties with the United States government, and having a conversation with the Founding Fathers at that site. So a lot of it was thought-provoking. Or we had one by the Vietnam Memorial, which talked about those Americans who were lost to the war, Vietnam War. But there was a piece done by an artist who told the story of what happened to those who left the country because of the war, the great diaspora, and where they settled and where they were displaced, and they ended up in these different places, including cities and places in this country, to have a different conversation about the impact of war and immigration and the causes of it. So that to me was really a remarkable 1 month. It was a temporary exhibition. We would love to do this again, but it was to really expand the storytelling potential of this very important space in a way that protects the open spaces of the mall, but allows kind of more inclusion and more representation and different sorts of voices to be told in the space. We're always going to have the Lincoln Memorial. We're always going to have the Washington Memorial, the Vietnam. These are very important stories that need to be told and will be told in this space. But to the extent that people have the opportunity to tell their stories in this fashion, I think is hugely important. And so to me, that's something that to be on the lookout over the next couple of years. We hopefully will do more of this. But I think it really, as a nation's capital, I think that's one of the great benefits and the great privileges of working in these types of public spaces, because it's really not only a space where you could recreate or or use it for its passive or recreational potential. But these are hugely symbolic spaces, and that they have some meaning to people, and that and being represented in this space and having our voices heard in our nation's capital, I think is hugely important, and one of the things that we're focusing on at this agency.
Well, Marcel Acosta, I want to thank you for taking some time to spend with us on Unplanned to tell us all about your fascinating work. I know DC is fascinating, and I know the work you guys do, you all do, your whole team does, is fascinating. But to hear it told is just amazing. And there's so many other stories that we could dig into, but I really appreciate you taking some time to spend with us.
Well, thank you so much.